Thanks all for being here. Hopefully you've made it to our morning sessions, and I know some of you have even already done your grafting sessions, so it's good to see some familiar faces popping up on the screen already. That's pretty fun. This session, we're going to be talking about how to care for your young tree. So as Lindsay will remind you, that is a really important part of this whole process. Regardless of how well you graft, you won't have a tree unless you also take care of it. So he's going to go through what you need to know for that. He has a presentation that he'll be giving for that part of everything. We'll have everyone actually turn off your videos. And then when he's done with the presentation, I'll have you turn them back on for the question and answer session. So if you want to turn those off now, go ahead. If you have questions as we're going, please feel free to type those in the chat and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. At the end of the presentation, again, I'll ask everyone to turn your video back on so we can see each other. And you can either type questions into the chat or raise your hand and ask the question yourself at that point. And I'll go over that again once we get to that point. So I'm guessing you've probably all already seen both Lindsay and myself, but in case you haven't, my name is Janine Shepard. I'm the Education and Engagement Manager here at Seed Savers Exchange. And we have Lindsay Lee, who's our Orchard Manager. He's one of the people that put together or planted our orchard here years ago and has been connected to Seed Savers ever since and has been working with trees and plants of all kinds for many years. So we're really lucky to be learning from him today. And I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Lindsay.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, this has been a fun thing. I was able to help with the original collection, the grafting that we did in 1989. And then I ran my own nursery up the road for ensuing 30 years, and now have kind of taken on this project because it needed a little help. Anyway, what we want to talk about now, you've done or are soon to do grafting, and there's a whole lot more to it than that. What you're doing now is the preliminary, the live carpentry part. But then we need to let the graft union heal a little bit and then plan it out. And I've had my fingers in horticulture all my life. And I've seen a lot of trees that looks like they didn't get cared for from the start. So I'm going to try to remedy that a little bit here. And I'm hoping that doesn't appear to be just my own bandwagon, but so you're ending up the day with grafted trees, and you can put them, what we're doing here is packing them back in the sphagnum moss in their plastic bag. And I like to cover the whole end here so that it's a humid, moist environment. When I'm doing a lot of trees, for my own use, I usually don't use a poly bag like this. Because I have a damp root cellar. So ooh, how's that? Can you see that?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, I'm sorry. So see, it's a good thing we've got a tech guy here. Again, I've got this packaged up. It's a nice, the important part is the environment we keep it in for the next 10 to 14 days at least. We want it to be cool and humid. And cool means not so warm that it'll grow mold, which usually doesn't start until you get up in the 60-degree neighborhood. And then humid, the packing material around the roots, you need to wring it out, and it needs to be damp but not soggy wet. And then the tops benefit from humidity too. But what I do in my own setting at home, I've got a really damp root cellar. And so I just, you see the roots here are packed in sphagnum moss, and these are just leaning on the brick wall. And they're at in this stage, their graft unions are growing callus and healing. If I do grafting today in early April, you know, I'm going to want to be planting them out in early May. That's plenty of time for them to heal quite well. But I could do this with good conditions. I could be doing this work in early February. And these trees would be perfectly happy sitting in these conditions. My root cellar's got just a gravel floor, so it's moisture is always coming up into there, and the ceiling's always got little droplets of water on it. So it's like 90% humidity full time. The sphagnum moss around the roots, I go in there once a month or so and sprinkle it with water. But that's the conditions you want, whether you need to do it with a trash bag, or if you've got facilities like a root cellar. I've also got on my farm got a well pit that would work beautifully. But either way, I also noticed this morning my garage is an insulated garage, and at this time of year it's running a pretty nice even 40 degrees, 45 degrees, and that's a usable space too. But then I would cover the tops and to keep some humidity on them. Once we plant them out, there's a second way to do this. Especially, I know, seeing that we probably have a larger geography covered with this group of students than usual. We're here in Zone 4 in Iowa. If we're in any milder climate than this, I might adopt this method, which is something an old grafter once talked to me about. He would plant his trees right out after grafting, like this. This is a new graft planted in the garden. Whoop. Then he put 4 wooden stakes around it at an appropriate distance, so that then you could fit. This happens to be a padded mailing envelope. He used a feed sack. So it's several layers of brown paper. That always worried me a little bit, because what was in the feed sack, probably ground chicken feed or something, and it might attract mice. But in this case, this feed sack is I cut up the bottom a little bit so I could splay it out and then lay soil over the base. So this is sealed, and what I've done is made a little room inside there with that tree inside it. Now, you don't want to do this with 100 trees, but with 4 or 5, it's pretty easy to manage this. And they don't have to be lath stakes. You could use just about anything that holds that open. And this is, this is in my own garden, and I had a pretty darn windy day the other day, and I noticed it was staying pretty stable, not banging around on my little graft tree inside there. What happens, I can let my tree sit in here for a couple of weeks, and its graft union can heal without the sun and the wind working to dry it out. That's actually going to be kind of a humid environment in there, just like we want. And I temper the elements by doing this. I probably wouldn't want to do this in a region where it was going to drop to below, say, 15 degrees. And probably wouldn't want to use it if I was in, southern Arizona, and we're going to be pretty, in the 80s already. But here in Zone 4 in Iowa, Right now, we can go to freezing easily. We can still see 20 degrees. And the only daytime highs of, well, highs right now for us in the 60s is unusually high, but there's a swing there, but it's kind of in the nice range. So I'm just saying that this is an alternative method if you're in a more mild climate. Once they've been in there for 10 to 14 days, I do this. I take a scissor and I cut the corners off, and that allows a little airflow through there. And just like growing an annual vegetable plant, you want to harden them off. And this just lets the interior environment dry out a little bit, a little airflow through there, and a little bit more sunshine in there too. And so I let that be like that for, let's say, another week even, until then I can take it off and let it grow. The timing on all this is to have your tree like this one here, you see, be ready to plant out. I'm seeing callus tissue in that graft union, and I want to plant this out not much earlier than a week before our frost-free date. Again, right here in zone 4, that's May 15th for us, so I'm going to be planting it in the first week of May. But it's really nice to see this callus tissue form. Now the wrapper, the tape is still on there, on the bottom half of this anyway, and it can stay on. This bud has swollen and is starting to grow, and if you've got them in a root cellar or a fridge or any setting, and that starts to swell very much, you probably want to get them out. Because if that's much bigger than what that's showing on this picture, and you put them out in the full sun, they can just dry out very quickly and shrivel, and the tree will usually push a secondary bud. And this is one reason we leave 2 or 3 buds on the graft, on the scionwood, because this one will probably grow too. But this gives you several chances to have one take. Once you get them in the ground, they're going to do this. Everything's going to grow. And so you want to look at it, and everything below the graft union comes off. And above the graft union, I let these go a little bit, but then as soon as I see that one is dominating, is the strongest of the 2, look at this one, I'll make a selection, and these young shoots, you can just rub sideways with your thumb and it comes right off. So you don't have to be hauling your clippers around or anything. The whole idea is to put all the growth out that one shoot. Here I have yet to decide, but this one's ready to go out. And again, that wrap, or if you're using rubber bands, that can stay in place for the summer. The sun will break it down. Here's one that's been in the nursery bed for a while, and 10 inches of growth, and I've taped it up. That just gives me a straighter stem. That doesn't look really straight now, but when that's got 2 years of growth on it, you barely see a hiccup in that trunk shape. If I let it just sweep, this actually makes it a little stronger. Right now, this tree is a little vulnerable to wind and can break off right at the graft union. So if you tape it up, you gain a little strength. And so that's another advantage to this. But you see, now that we've reduced all but one shoot, this growth really happens. It's not unusual for a 1 year grafted tree to put on, I don't know, 3-4 feet of growth in one summer. And there again, this is a graft union that's completely healed, and the callus tissue is starting to turn into bark, and it's ready for the field. Can't emphasize this enough. By the first fall, these things have to be wrapped one way or another, and it is, you know, without protection, somebody's going to eat them. So around here, we have tremendous deer pressure. So our big orchards have 8-foot fences around them. These wraps just around the plant itself can protect from both rodents and rabbits. Though for rabbits, you need to graft, in our climate, you need to graft way up because we can have 2 feet of snow on the ground at times, and rabbits will walk right over the top of that and eat your trees, though that'll be the tips and not necessarily the main trunk. But I can't tell you how many people I've heard from who took our grafting class in the past and said they had them all take and they're wonderfully happy with it, except that when the snow melted in the spring, they were all eaten. And it's a sad, sad story to hear. And so this is, I'm telling you now, to be ready to wrap these up come fall. This is a method I use just because it's about the cheapest thing I found. It takes a little time, but I take the paper wrap and fold it and staple it, staple up the edge so that it gives me protection below the snow line. And then you see in the background, I have some chicken wire here buried into the ground so the rabbits don't get through that. So that'll get you through the first year. You've got, so what do we do in the second year? Again, I drive around and I see trees all over the landscape that have been planted, and obviously nobody knew what to do with them. So here you go. This is going to be very specific about year 1, 2, 3. So really, graft year was year 1. This is year 2, and here this is just in a bucket, ready to go out to the orchard. You see, this is the little stump that I tied it up to. That'll just decay and rot away, no problem there. And this is my single stem. We call this a whip. When you're once in a while, you get what we call feathers, a little branching on it. But the whip is usual for the first year. This one isn't terribly huge. I think from the graft union to the tip might be 24 inches. What we do now is decide where we want our first scaffold of branches to be. And if you want that to be, say, 30 inches off the ground, I'm going to cut it at 30, I'm going to cut it at 34 if I want them at 30. Because what happens, this is called a heading cut. And by cutting the terminal off, I've what we call heading it back, I have caused that tree to have to redirect its energies. And what happens? It comes out the side in this form. So I've headed this back. The second year, I'll get little branching out the side. And what I want, there's so many ways to prune a tree, but my big message to you here today is to have an idea what you want when you're starting out, because you can absolutely direct the shape of this tree. And if you don't, it may not go the way you want it, and there's problems that will arise from it. So by heading the tree back, say I even head this back at 36 inches, below that, I'm going to get shoots. Well, I can save those. I can select the 3. Usually I like to have 3 branches in a given scaffold. And here's a scaffold here in the second year, and another scaffold. and we want these to have good space between them. But we select those so that there's 3 of them roughly in each scaffold. And you can decide if this is 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, or whatever, by where you make this cut. You're still going to get a shoot coming out the top. Apple trees will always give you a chance to have the leader back. So here I've saved these. I can head it back and I'll get another set of scaffold branches under that heading cut again. Year 3, we will have a I'll show you pictures of this in a bit, but developed scaffold branches and some sucker shoots coming off of here, water shoots, and those all the vertical shoots get removed. So there's a lot more to this whole thing than that, but I want you to realize that you can cut the leader. You make that cut just above a bud, and it'll just come back out and grow up the next year as well. And that gives you a way to establish the scaffold branching where you want it. So year 3, we're talking more about the selection of the scaffold. And this is a 3-year-old tree that was headed off. You can see a little crook here. It was headed off right there. And so here's 1, 2, 3, 4 branches that I get to choose from. This one's a little big. It thinks it might want to be a leader someday, and we weren't going to allow that. So we're going to head it back. And if it's one we're choosing to keep, and then I'll probably go up here and head this leader back again to cause more branching up in this area. I have a firm belief in the rule of thumb, and that is, sorry about the focus on that, but the thumb, you should make most of your cuts on a tree when they're smaller diameter than your thumb. If you do that, look what happens. They heal. This is all callus tissue that's come in from the side, and a cut that's smaller than my thumb will heal in usually 1 year. That gives the tree very little opening for rot in this wood that's exposed and disease to enter there. It's not absolute. You can still make a big cut if you have to. But if you have a clear idea of what shape you want the tree to be when you start, then you can make them with a hand clipper instead of a pruning saw. And it's so much easier. So fruiting wood, we've been talking so far today about new growth for scion wood. Well, I see no new growth that's usable on this. This is all older growth, fruiting wood, flower buds. This is a cluster of flowers. The terminal bud usually comes out with a big fat cluster of like 5 or 6 flowers. The flower buds that come off the side of the stem, usually like this one here, have just a flower or 2. But this is old wood. Now, most fruit trees, apple trees, produce best on wood that's 2, 3, and 4 years old. And you get beyond that, and you get something like what you see on this, and it's stunted growth. And they'll still produce fruit, but it's not as productive as if you've got some new growth coming on. So what can I do about this? I can do renewal cuts. Basically, I can come in here or back here and cut just above another branch, and that will encourage some new growth to come out of this branch. And that allows that new growth. You're going to get 1 year of growth that would look like our scion wood, but after that, it's going to start producing flower buds. Like this. This is new growth. This is all going to flower, but see, next year this new growth piece will flower. And this one we could use as flower bud. You can also, might be a good one to talk about this on. So I've got a new growth stem here. I can head that back a little bit here, and if I want it to, I'm always going to cut to an outside bud when I do that, so that my wood keeps growing outward. I think we've got photos to illustrate that later, but in doing heading back cuts on new growth like this, if I cut it back a little bit, I'll get a little bit of new growth. If I cut it back here in the middle, I'll get a medium amount of new growth coming out of all these buds. And if I cut, say here's the first outside bud, say I cut it to there, well, this is going to come out with a new growth, and it's going to be a long one. It's going to be a big shoot. So if I want to slow down a tree from producing new wood, I cut it out here. Whereas if I cut it way back here, I'm gonna encourage the tree to put on a ton of new growth. These are what we refer to as water shoots, sucker shoots, what have you. They're coming straight up out of the limb, and they always start out as vegetative growth, no flowers at all. The problem with them is that they often, you can see up back here, this is quite a ways out the branch, and there's some going straight up off of there. If I leave that, these shoots are taking up a lot of the nutrient that's heading up this limb. And they literally can grow to be a small tree standing out here on the end of this limb. And that's just a structural nightmare that's gonna be really hard on the tree to have a small tree growing on the end of its limb. So we want to always take these off. Though, you see here on this limb, I've got branches coming off the side. And I think usually I end up with a branch has my side branches come off the sides. I tend to take everything that's off the bottom off because they're going to be in the shade. And I take these vigorous shoots off the top. Though, if somewhere along this branch I want some fruiting wood, I can decide, well, I'm going to keep this one. And I'll go up about 3 inches and I'll just cut it off as a stub, hopefully above a bud that's going in a direction I'd like. And what happens, that's just like a heading cut, and those, what's below it will grow branches, side branches. And those branches will grow for that first summer after the heading back cut, and then depends on just how vigorous they are. Quite likely in their second year, they'd start making flower buds. So I can create fruiting wood here by heading this water shoot back, but mostly I take all these off. And I only do this if I've got a, say a 30-inch piece of branch that doesn't have any fruit production possibilities on it. I can make that happen. Okay, I was talking about scaffolding, and this is an attempt to illustrate that. This is what's called a central leader style of tree pruning, or sometimes a modified scaffold. That all depends on whether or not we let a leader go on above this upper scaffold. But this is what we want. These scaffolds are literally solar collectors. And we want them to be spread wide out from the tree so they can get the most access to sun and wind. Wind is important for fruit trees because you need airflow through them to dry them out as quickly as possible in the morning. So the fungal aspects, the rust and diseases don't have so much of an opportunity. The quicker the tree dries out, the better. That's, I'm referring to rain events and morning dew. So we want the tree to have some nice widely spaced scaffolds, and what we really like, perfect tree, would be three branches in this scaffold. You go up, say 3-4 feet, and you've got 3 branches in this, and hopefully they're offset, so they're not directly over that branch, but in between, and so on. This is a modified scaffold as well, and it's some of this is pruner's preference and how low to the ground they want to start. I see here in this orchard that they're using some mechanical tillage around this, so they need to be able to get that machinery under there. But it's still pretty short, and the distance between here is an option, but this is pruned pretty short, and I don't know if that's some varieties grow wider than they do tall, but I'm guessing this is Harry Hoke's preference in this pruning method. And then one more, this is an older tree. You can see the branches are getting sturdier and sturdier. Something we've been doing in our orchard this year, we've learned that you don't ever want one of your side scaffold branches to become larger than your central leader. So if it gets up close or even larger than the diameter of the central leader, you simply, I'd go to we've been taking them off. Usually there's another little twig of a branch somewhere near that you can save and train out as the next member of that scaffold. Just so that, because if this branch becomes bigger than my leader, well, it's then become the leader and it's off to the side. And it's going to create an off-balance tree. And besides generating new growth, new wood will encourage that 2, 3, and 4-year-old fruiting wood that is so very productive. Like I say, everybody's got their own methods. I do some of this in my own orchard at home. This is an open vase-shaped tree where I don't have a central leader and the thing's wide open. It looks more like this isn't my orchard, but this looks more like a satellite dish. You can see here, this branch is thinking it wants to be a leader. So it's taking a lot of the energy of the tree and thrusting upward. So my guess is that's going to come out and putting all the growth out into these laterals. With a heavy fruit load, these branches may need support. But most of us that are training vase-shaped trees are also really working to limit the extent of this sideways growth to keep it from getting these branches from getting too terribly long. Okay, crotch angle is a favorite topic of mine, and it's also very important because you're asking your branches to grow out. Ideally is between 45 and 60 degrees from the upright center of the tree. And that is because a wide open crotch like this has solid wood here. And I'll show you in some other slides. A very graphic example of that. But this is the proper angle. Sometimes you see them in orchards almost 90 degrees out, and that's probably too much because you got to think of it. These branches are going to hold bushels of fruit, and that gets heavy. There's 2 ways to control the shape of a branch coming off your tree. One is by simply pruning to an outside bud, here's a shoot that's coming out away from the tree. And if I cut to this bud, this shoot next year is going to come out like this. Okay, it's gonna continue to grow out. If I cut right ahead of this one that's on top, that's going to go straight up. Here's an example. So you cut just beyond the bud, and here this is being cut just beyond that outside bud. Here's the cut that was made a year ago, and here's the new growth. Now, this one is going to have to come off, but this is the way we want that tree to grow. That's really a nice example of what happens when you cut to an outside bud. You get this horizontal growth, where if you make a cut to the inside, look at this one. Somebody cut that right there and by an inside bud, and it goes straight up. Or this one was cut here and up it goes. So you can really control where your trees grow via cutting. You can also do it with spacers or spreaders. This is simply a piece of wooden lath from the lumber yard with notches cut in the end. I'll get a bundle of 4-foot lath, and I cut some of them in half, some of them in thirds, some of them in quarters, and I have a multiple lengths to work with. And you cut a nice deep notch so they grab the trunk, and then if this side branch is coming out at too steep an angle, I can push it out, put this in, and leave it there for one season, and you're done. It doesn't need to be there any longer than that. Here's a nice wide crotch angle, both of them. This slide is here in case you ever need to make large cuts. There's a specific place you need to do this, and there's a thing called the collar. When I was first working in the nursery trade, I was a young boy really, they taught us then to cut flush with the trunk. So you would draw a line from trunk to trunk like that. Well, that ended up producing this huge scar. Nowadays, they've said to cut at the collar. And so look at this, and there's well, the best place is right here. There's a little bulge right there. And that bulge exists around most every, especially apple wood branch coming off of another. So that cut should be made right through here. So with a big limb, you do this. You come out here and you cut up from the bottom. You go a little bit out and you cut on from the top. And you've just taken the weight away without a chance of ripping bark. Then once the weight's gone, you can make this final cut, and it should come right in there. I hope you can see that. It's really a nice thing because this will heal faster than anything else. And that's the big objective when you're taking off big wood. Okay, here's a crotch that's too narrow. And there's something happening in here that I'll show you in a bit. Once in a while, you'll see this and you'll get a twig that's growing out from the middle of a crotch. And you certainly don't want to allow that. If you can, catch that when it's very young and you can just break them out. But this divides this crotch angle into two even narrower crotch angles. The problem with a narrow crotch angle is this: you get ingrown bark, and so you don't have solid wood. Here's an example of well-grown crotch, and this is all solid wood. It's very, very strong. This limb could hold 10 bushels of apples. This one is too narrow and it's got this ingrown bark. So technically, from where my pointer is now on up, is not connected to the rest of the tree. You can see that that's a very, very weak connection, and they will ultimately do this. This tree is not dead. I mean, it split, but it didn't fall down. So you could have, in hindsight, you could have bolted this tree. That's kind of a tree surgeon's trade, but it's best when the tree is the size of your thumb to make those adjustments and push those branches out sideways so they're not so narrow and you don't have this problem to begin with. This is what I'm saying when I drive through the countryside, I see the majority of trees have this all too often, where this is really what you want. And once in a while you see an orchard and I go, oh, somebody knew what they were doing. So you can control their shape, and you get a ton of fruit on these things sometimes. So you want to do those cuts early and not, not allow them to have that ingrown bark. So that brings us to having grown a little apple tree, and hopefully in 2 summers, you'll have a group of little apple trees to move out of your garden and into the orchard. So I'm going to have you watch this little video that Janine's going to fire up for us, and pay attention. This has some little tips. I spent my lifetime in horticulture. I always said I was just a glorified shovel bum, and there's some real good shovel bum tips in here. So, okay, we're here in the orchard at Seed Savers Exchange, and I want to talk to you today about how to transplant a tree using bare root methods. Any tree can be transplanted when it's dormant, meaning the leaves are off. Right now, today it's fall, that you can do this in the spring too, after the ground thaws and before the buds break and it starts to leaf out. But it works in the fall as well. We're in zone 4, so keep that in mind. But this is the time it can be done. So if I'm going to dig this tree, any method I use is going to cut some roots. So it's a good opportunity or a good idea to also reduce the size of the top. Okay, if I take, say, 50% of the root system off, I should compensate the top the same. Okay, so let me take my clippers here. It's also a time when you can think about the shaping of the tree, because all these branches are small diameter yet. I always say you want to do your trimming cuts before the branches are bigger than your thumb. If you do that, those branches heal quickly within a season, and so there's very little chance of them getting infected or anything like that. So here I have kind of the beginning of a scaffold of branches coming off the trunk at this height. The tree was headed back right where my finger is here, and so it burst out with all these branches. So I'm going to go up the trunk. I don't want my scaffold to start that low to the ground, so I just took off all the lower branches. I want ideally 3 stems coming out at my first scaffold. Looking down on the tree, I see some that are pretty evenly spaced here, like this one and this one and this one. So I'm going to take this big guy off. These I'm going to let grow, but I'm going to shorten them. I'm cutting to an outside bud so they grow out. Take this one off. I'm going to take this one off. And this one. This stem has a little bit of a sharp angle to it, so I'm going to insert a spacer to force that angle out. We want those branches to be between 45 and 60 degrees off the trunk, and that spacer can be in there for one growing season and it's enough. It'll have it out. I also can go up the central leader and shorten that. If I have a scaffold here and head it back again here, it'll branch here again, and I can then select another scaffold of branches here. Anyway, we've now reduced the branch structure of this tree enough that I think we can now dig the tree and move it. And in the spring, when it leaves out, it won't have more top than the root system can support. Okay, with that, I'm going to dig around. For bare root, we want to preserve all the root we can. I've got a trunk that's probably about 3/4 of an inch diameter. And a good relationship would be, say, think about a foot of soil of root for every inch of trunk. So if I dug a foot out from the trunk, I should get most of the root system. This is a tree, of course, that's in a nursery bed, so it's been transplanted once as a small tree, so it's got a smaller root system than if it was just simply a seedling. I'm just going around to loosen the soil at this point. And I'm prying directly away from the tree. If I were to ball and burlap this tree, I'd be cutting away and not disturbing the root. But because I'm going to shake all the soil off, I'm going to go ahead and loosen the soil as I go. I've got some cover crop vegetation here to get rid of. Okay, now I'm going to start loosening soil and removing soil from the hole. You can see the tree wiggle. I know I'm contacting the root system. The more I dig, the looser it'll get. That was good. Push it in another. There you go. Now this is bare root, not dry root. We want to keep this root system damp in the interim between the time I dig it up and when we plant it. So let's go do that. Okay, we've chosen a spot for the tree. It should be in the full sun. Apple trees love all the sun they can get. There happens to be turf grass here, so I've been digging this out. And you don't want to put the grass back in the hole, but we do want to keep all the soil. We'll need all the soil to go back in the hole when we plant the tree. We also, here we've got the tree in a bucket of water, keeping the roots moist while we're digging the hole and moving it from where we dug it up. Another thing we want to check, we want this hole to be wider than the root system. And I've got enough sod removed to do that. So here we go. Like I said, I want to keep all this soil so I can put it back in the hole. So I'm just going to use a little tarp, pull up some soil, break it up. When that soil goes back in the hole, it should be crumbly. We don't want big chunks. We want no air pockets left under there. So we need to break it up into small particles. There's a fine point here. You notice I started digging in the middle of the hole. I find a lot of people stick their shovel in, they draw a circle, stick their shovel in around the outer edge. Every time I pry back then, I'm prying against more soil. If I take the center out first, then when I pry back, I'm prying against air. It makes your digging just a little bit easier. The hole needs to be wider than your root system. It doesn't need to be any deeper. And the bigger the tree you transplant, the more important that is, because when I water this in, all this soil is going to turn to mud. And if I've got a lot of, if I've overdug the depth, the tree could settle. So I'm going to dig, you know, the possible exception to that would be if I'm digging in a location that for one reason or another had compacted soil. Okay. Now we can try this out. I want the top root of the root system to be about 1.5 inches or 2 below the surface when I'm all finished, when it's all said and done. So here's the top of the root system. My shovel's straight, so here's where the soil line's going to be. And I think that's about right. About 1.5 inches, 2 inches. All right. I'm going to continue pulverizing my soil. Hold the tree upright. It's nice sometimes to have a helping hand with this, but it can be done on your own. Soon as I've got soil over the roots, I'll give it a little shake, settle that, and it'll stand on its own. Now I can continue to fill. Okay, time for another fine point lesson. I'm going to water this tree in now. I'm not putting all the soil back in the hole. I'm putting about 80 or 90% of the soil back in. And I'll show you why. There's one bucket. We've got about 5 gallons of water total. We put it in 2 buckets so it's easier to carry. Oh, you hear it gurgling, it's carrying. I like to flood the hole so the weight of that water carries soil particles down in, fills all the gaps, and saturates the soil. Now I got a little weight to do because I'd like it to soak away. It's made mud out of this backfill soil. In the interim, I can continue to pulverize this soil. I put that on the tarp. This way I can get all that soil back. Okay, our water is soaked away, and so it's time to finish filling the hole. The reason I like to do this, if you've ever made a mud pie and let it dry, it cracks up. And that cracked, that hard baked, cracked surface isn't desirable. It's impenetrable. If we get a nice natural rainfall in the near future, it's just, it hits this little concrete surface and it's not going to enter the soil so well. So I like to leave the soil on the surface dry. So I'm backfilling with the last 15% of the soil here in a dry state with my tarp. It's really easy. To do so. There. A little mulch would keep the weeds down. The roots of this tree are in a bucket of mud with a nice crumbly dry surface on it. The sod I'm going to put to the compost pile. A little tree wrap to guard this through the winter, and we're good to go. One important point. Right here is a little bulge in the trunk of the tree. That's the graft union. The rootstock that this is on is a dwarfing stock that'll keep this tree about 50% its normal size. Above is the desired variety we have. So that graft union is really important. And as long as it's out of the ground, those qualities will stay the same. If I had overdug the hole too deep and it settled, or if I continually pile too much mulch up on it, that graft union can grow its own root from the scionwood above it. That will negate the dwarfing properties of the rootstock. Understand? So that it's just important to keep the graft union out of the ground unless I want to turn it into a standard size tree.
Is that the end of that there, Lindsay, or did that get cut off?
That was the end.
Okay, back to you.
Is that right? Okay, not much left of the talk, then we'll go into some questions. I see there are a few. But this is the main gate of one of the two orchards we have here at Seed Savers. And if some of you are lucky enough to live nearby or for some reason be in the neighborhood, that gate's always open. And we encourage people to come and visit. We're just about to hit bloom time, and bloom time is kind of perfect for picnics. It's quite an experience to see all those trees in bloom. Maybe even a better time is in the fall, you know, late August, September, October. There's lots of fruit, and you're welcome to roam and taste. We don't allow large-scale picking without permission, but people are welcome to walk through and taste a fruit or two off of each tree, which is way more than you'd ever want to do. So please visit sometime and let us know you're going to be here. We'd like to show it to you. Here's a little teaser for spring bloom time. Certainly, I walk people through here all the time and they say, well, what's your favorite? And, it's impossible to tell when you work with hundreds and hundreds of varieties of apples. I would have to say it's usually the last one I ate. But so I think that's about it. Yes, I hope you're hungry and your apples aren't too far away. On a semi-dwarf stock, they'll just take a couple of years to produce fruit. I shouldn't say a couple of years. I should say 3 to 5 years to produce fruit, and you're on your way to a rewarding hobby. With that, I think we could go to some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. If anyone would like to, you're welcome to turn your videos back on. We love to see your faces, and feel free. It looks like we already have lots of great questions in the comment or in the chat session here, and I'll read those to Lindsay. Also, if you have a question you want to ask yourself, please raise your hand and we will call on you with that. Lindsay, before we get into these kind of deeper questions, there's a couple of just clarifying questions I'm going to ask really quickly here. One, can you remind us what the optimal temperature to store these trees that have just been grafted before planting?
Well, you're going to test me because I wrote that.
I can look that up too.
I wrote that instruction sheet out months ago. But I would say above, you want it above freezing, you want it 34 minimum. And the upper end is a little more forgiving. Like I said, you can get mold development over 60. So I wouldn't go there. And if you did up to near there for 50, 55, I wouldn't leave it there very long. I'd leave it there for maybe 4 or 5 days and then try to cool it down. So the bulk of your storage between 34 and 40, 44, somewhere in there would be perfect.
Great. And then could you also define or show the outside bud for clarification?
Okay. Can you see that? Maybe it's better if I...
Yeah, no, I think we can see that.
So imagine this is coming off my tree and I've got a nice shoot come, well, maybe, oftentimes they're more like this. But I've got this vertical shoot here, and kind of an automatic reaction to that is to take that off. Vertical growth is not very welcome in my orchard anyway. So I often find myself just running my finger up the back side, and I can feel this. There's a bud here. There's an outside bud there. Here's the point where there's new growth started. This is last year's growth. So I can come out, if I want to just head this back a little bit, I'd come out to here. But that's a bud that's on the outside. It's away from the center of the tree. This one, the next one back, is on the top of the branch, and it's, we call that an inside bud, because if I cut to that, this branch will just simply go straight up. So I have a lot of opportunities here. Here's an outside bud. Here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. If I want to really take this back, I've got a little shoot here. I can go to that. I don't know if you can see that. So I could come back in here. And then I've got a shoot coming here, and it's gonna continue on out that direction. Is that clear? You want to cut to a bud that's on the outside of the stem, away from the trunk.
Thank you.
Just to get that outward sweep of the branch.
Great. So I have a few questions about that mailer option that you use, that option of kind of creating that room. One of the questions is just whether that mailer would be with bubble wrap or cellulose, with a concern that bubble wrap might get too hot.
I think I would use either one. I have been collecting mailers all this last year and have a nice supply of them for this spring. And I think the bubble wrap would not get hot. You do not want, again, you don't want clear and you don't want black. You don't want it to absorb much light, and you don't want to make a little greenhouse. Okay.
Right.
But
And
I've used the cellulose ones too, and I think they're just great. And they're all, you know, they're all natural and recyclable too.
And do you have a sense of what zones that would work in? Someone's specifically asking about zone 6, but I think if you have any way of delineating where that would and wouldn't work.
I think zone 6 is perfect for it. Well, again, we're here in zone 4, and I'm afraid I've lived in zone 4 all my life. So, but I know that people will use this, say, out in Oregon and stuff like that. I think you could probably even use it. I think you could use it in zone 5 even, but and much south of 6 and 7, I don't have much experience with that at all. So that would be experimental. If you do have them, say, in a root cellar or refrigerator until it's time to plant them out, and you're in a place where, you know, you go outside today and it, you know, not here, but if you went outside and it was 80 and dry and windy, you might want to provide some kind of protection, a little remade tent. I knew I had a woman that worked for us that made what she called media thumbres. They were little tents to just give shade in the middle of the day. And her favorite thing was to set a lawn chair over it. Just to keep from putting that thing from the fridge out into the hot, dry sun right away, to ease the transition. So even here in zone 4, I look at the weather, and if it's time to bring them out of the root cellar and plant them out, and I look at the week ahead, and am I going to pick the hottest day? I'd rather not. I'd pick the cloudiest day. And you know, on the 1st of May, we're going to be seeing days in the 60s and 70s, but maybe if I can pick a 60-degree cloudy day, it would be much better than a 75-degree dry day.
Yeah, thank you. There are a couple of questions about planting a new tree in a pot, whether you can do that for the first year, and also along with this, creating a room, if you could plant the new tree in a pot and use a plastic bag over it with stakes in a similar fashion.
Yeah, I'm very opinionated on this. I have, you know, I've been a hort guy all my life, and I had somebody one time give me a few Asian pears that he drafted, and they're not technically hardy here. And so I didn't plant them in the ground. I put them in pots, and I would grow those in pots and then move them into the root cellar over winter. And, you know, after a few years, they grew nice and big. I was getting a nice little crop of Asian pears off of those. And I would, when needed, I'd repot them into a larger pot and gradually bumped them up until they eventually got to be big trees in 20-gallon pots. And they were quite a chore to drag into my root cellar every year and drag back out in the spring. Finally, 2 falls ago, I just left them out for the winter and they died because it was just getting so much work. But I had those trees in pots for 20 years. Now, this is why I have opinion about it. The reality of having a tree in a pot for very long at all means you're responsible for that tree. And so think about me keeping trees alive through every summer, watering them every single day. So when I wanted to go on a little camping trip or something, I had to wrangle my neighbor into doing that for me. It's just an awesome responsibility. Now, back when I ran my nursery, I had employees. I had some automated watering systems, and it made it a little easier. But you have 5 little trees in pots, so you're going to want to water them pretty regularly. And it turns out to be a lot of work. So I'm always in favor of putting things in the ground where they can take a little less care. I understand if you don't have ground right now. I've had people in our grafting workshops that didn't have, had a patio or a deck, and they manage that. But it's a lot of work to have things in pots. Is that the whole question? Oh, the tent. Well, if you put a bag over the tent, it better not, again, it better not be black, or it better not be clear. You can get white poly bags. They're a little better. I might look for a place that's not in direct sun for that system. Okay.
Great. Thank you. It looks like we have someone raising their hand. Michelle has Watts. Do you want to lower your hand and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, yes. So the question is specifically about some of the scionwood varieties. I ordered the Farmstead kit, and that has varieties like Lady or Northern Spy. And I live in zone 10A.
Ooh.
Depending on your formula, maybe 500, 600 shell hours. I'm not like super optimistic that any of these varieties will succeed tremendously here. But I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, we tried to pick some that would work for most of the country. And we're also a collection of varieties that grow well here in Zone 4. So we really don't have many what we call southern varieties that will fruit with low chill hours. So I guess you can do one of two things. You can chalk this up to just a pure and simple learning experience, or you can go. You could probably find an apple grower nearby that would give you some scionwood off of trees that are known to grow in your region. If you're doing the effort, you might want to do that. But we simply don't have much here in the collection that would do well for you down there. But I applaud you for trying to learn it, because you can, obviously there's still apples that can grow there. But I find that most apples can grow well into the north, but there are only a certain ones that can grow in the deep south, where there just aren't that many chilling hours.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Here's a question that's kind of an immediate question. When you first are, let's see, where did this go? When you're wrapping the grafts today, do you put the moist moss just around the roots, or should it extend up to cover the graft site? And could you clarify if you're waiting 10 to 14 days before you plant them in the garden with the mailer around them?
Okay, so the sphagnum moss that was in your package should go around the roots mainly. Yeah. If that's in the container with the rest of the plant, then the rest of the plant still gets some humidity off of that. But the graft union itself doesn't need to be in a damp medium. Okay, we just want that scionwood material not to dehydrate. And just being in a plastic bag, it's not going to do that.
Great.
So is that enough?
Yeah, I think you answered that. Thank you. We have a number of questions about tree wraps. Could you tell us what kind of paper wrap you used? When you would remove that, if you remove that in the spring, or how many years you need to wrap it? And can you keep that wrapping all year round, or could that hurt the tree if you keep it wrapped for too long?
Yeah, that tree wrap that you saw a row in my own little nursery, that was, you can buy rolls of a little crepe paper like material, and it's crinkly, a little stretchy, and there's a layer of, I believe it's tar in there, and that is just something that the rodents get into. If they get into that, they go, oh, we don't want to go here, and back out. So it's a pretty effective tree wrap. It's made for bigger trees where you would wrap it around the trunk and then we tape or staple it. But I find if I just make a little sleeve of it for my little baby trees, that's very inexpensive. But you got to have a stapler for it. The spirals, again, we use a lot of them here. They're very effective. They're reusable, but again, they're plastic, so we try not to overuse that stuff. And the tree tubes, the grow tubes, are something out of the forestry industry, and they're made so you can plant a young seedling tree down in there and put a stake in. It holds it up. Tree grows up through it and is safe from the deer. And that's mostly what it saves you from, but those work as well.
Great.
It's a matter of preference and what's easiest for you to get a hold of, I guess. You can also use a cylinder of hardware cloth, but the hardware cloth and the spiral wraps, both of those I've seen cases where they've been left on too long and they end up digging into the tree, growing into the bark. They're nearly impossible to get off. And so you gotta put those on with a degree of responsibility that you're gonna get them off of there before they strangle the tree.
Thank you. You talked about, when you were talking about the pruning and shaping a tree, when you talk about a horizontal branch, does that stay at the same height as it starts, or does it get carried up as the tree grows?
That's a amazingly common misconception, but if I have a branch on a tree, it's not going anywhere. It stays right where it's at. So I don't know if it comes from the fact that in nature, lower limbs often fall off of trees, so that the lower branch structure seems to go higher and higher. But no, if I have a branch that starts 2 feet off the ground, it's always going to be there unless I take it off or it breaks off. So no, the trunk doesn't get any longer on its own. It just gets wider.
And do you make the first leader cut this first summer, or does that happen next spring?
Well, next spring.
Great. You talked about fruiting wood versus vegetative wood. Couple questions about that. One, is there an actual difference between the fruit wood and the vegetative wood, or is that just what happens according to the way you prune it?
They're both the same genetic material. It's just that one's 1 year old and the other is 2, 3, or 4 or more years old. Here I cut up my example, but yeah, here I've got a slender shoot, 1 year growth, and I've got a piece of old wood full of flower buds, and these are both the same genetic material. It's just that this one grew a lot. The first year of any applewood growth is always going to just be leaves in that first year. Flowering shrubs, there you have 2 different types. You have plants that bloom on first year wood and plants that bloom on second year wood. So it depends, on something like a spirea. Bridal wreath spirea blooms on 2-year-old growth, whereas the little red ones, Froebelii or something like that, will bloom on new growth. So the ones that bloom on new growth, I can cut to the ground every spring, and I get this nice, thick, full bush that blooms all over it. But if I did that to a bridal wreath, I would have cut all its blossoms off, just like, or a lilac. Lilacs bloom on 2-year-old wood only. So apple trees bloom on 2, 3, and 4-year-old wood.
Great, thank you. Christina is saying that she lives in a climate with very strong sun in southern Colorado, wondering if it would be a good idea to keep the scaffolding more on the narrow side, considering, the question I guess is, could they get too much sun?
I doubt it. Everything we do is to open the tree up so it gets more and more sun. Whenever around here I see a tree that even is shaded part of the day, they don't do as well as one that's out in the full sun. I think you'd be hard pressed to give a tree too much sun.
Great. I'm going to warn everyone that doesn't look like we'll get to all the questions, but like this morning, we do have the questions. Go ahead and add any questions, even if you're worried we won't get to it. We'll go over it and we'll send you an email with some answers if we don't get to it today. I'm going to go ahead and go into this. We have a few questions about soil amendments. People are wondering if the soil is heavy clay or peat. Should you add amendments to lighten it? If you have rocky soil, et cetera, do you recommend a soil test? What do you do to get the soil right for your trees?
Great question. We could go on and on about it. The elevator talk is that I think the texture of the soil has more to do with your tree's happiness than the fertility. I think your soils should be, excuse me, loose, friable. Tree roots actually need more air than you think. So if you plant a tree in a hole and then jump in there with your feet and stomp it all down, you're not going to have a happy tree. So in our neighborhood, we have a lot of fairly heavy clay. So the rules change a little bit in sandier soils, but in heavy clays, I do not recommend much in the way of soil amending. I will put some nutrient in there, but as far as organic matter, I lay off, because if I overdo that even a little bit, what I end up with is a clay bucket with a load of soft soil in it, and that, basically the water drains out of the tight clay soil into the softer soil that you've made in that pit, and you can have a puddle of water in the bottom of your planting hole. I'd rather have you just loosen the soil that's there, plant into it, feed it a little bit, and make sure you don't pack it back into the hole. I find far more issues with trees that are suffering from compacted soils than from malnutrition soil or lack of organic matter. Tree roots will grow far and wide and find the nutrients they need. So if I improve the soil in the little hole I've dug to plant it, in 3 years, that root system's not even there. It's way out beyond that hole. And there is a phenomenon in planting nursery trees. Sometimes if you make too sweet a hole, the plant might not grow out of it. It says, "Ooh, I'm not growing out into that clay. I'm going to stay here in this peat." And then it, I've dug up trees that were failing and found that they were the same size as the hole was when they were planted.
Let's do one more question here. When when it is time to plant these newly grafted trees into the garden, is there a need to do some kind of hardening off? And how far apart should they be planted this first year in the garden?
Great. If they're going into a nursery situation, you can plant them out a foot or two apart in the row, and the row width, you know, that probably with 5 trees, you're not going to have a row width. You're going to have a little row of 5 trees. They should, if you watch the weather and plant them out when you think you're going to have a cloudy day, that should be enough. I don't think there's, unless they're leafed out. If they're leafed out, you might take them out and set them in the shade for a day or two in their root, with their roots packed in moisture, and then plant them out, just so the leaves don't scorch off right away.
Great. Thank you so much. Like I said, we're unfortunately not going to get to all of these questions, but you guys have some really great questions, and we will take time in the next week to go through them. You'll be hearing from me again, and it will include links to the video that was included. That was something we didn't have when I sent out the first email. So the video you saw during this session, we'll make sure you have a link to that. And we'll make sure that you have Lindsay's contact information and Jen's contact information as well. So we really do want to stay connected to you guys, and we want you guys to succeed at grafting and caring for your orchard. We're really excited you're here, and we want to hear from you. So you will hear from us again in the next week or two with a bunch more information here. And thanks again. We hope to see you again.